I'm going to try to read new poems today, so we'll see how those go. I was living out in, I spent last summer out in Marfa, Texas. I don't know if anybody has heard of that place. It's this desolate little bunch of houses in the desert. It was very lonely most of the time because they wouldn't let me have visitors. They put me in a house and gave me a little Prius, but no visitors were allowed. So I spent a lot of time watching House Hunters International and looking at Yahoo News, where I read about the disturbing frequency with which doctors, surgeons leave items inside of their patients before sewing them up, which is where this poem comes from. And it has various voices, and it might help to know that one of the voices, or one of the perspectives, not voices, is the surgeon, and another one is the patient, lying on the table looking up at the surgeon, and the third is this professor, right, who comments on the action like a sort of anachronistic Greek chorus. It's called Inside the Body. He left the clamp inside the body, and only that night, lying in bed, did he realize what he'd done. This is why he couldn't sleep. This is why the next morning he was so tired he left a safety pin inside another body. This is why he forgot the sponge in the rib cage, the scope in the abdomen. This is why he forgot the tweezers and the asepto bulbs, the surgical retractor and the needle. He had such worries he couldn't rest, and all day long he bent over sleeping bodies holding scalpels that inevitably he'd leave inside them before he sewed them up. When I woke, it was to a bright light and God was bending over me. He's coming too, God said, and his face grew large and blotted out the glare. Dear God, I was thinking, I cannot feel my legs. Dear God, I am like a mind floating over a table on which my body is sleeping. The university professor was saying that the body exists to demarcate the liminal space between the living and the dead. The body, she was saying, is a contested zone between presence and absence, between consciousness and eternal sleep, between the earth and the afterlife, between ourselves and the terrifying ambiguity of the void. The students wrote all of this down. The body, she said, is a foreign object, neither the person we know nor the empty husk that person leaves behind. It is a symbol unmoored from the limitations of meaning. My body was full of foreign objects, bone saw, syringe, several yards of gauze. I could see them glittering as I rose above the surgical lamps. At night, the surgeon dreamed of the objects he'd lost inside his patients, lined up on long windowsills, glittering in the playful sunshine, steel retractors, suction tips, drills, and calipers. In his dream, his surgical mask fell off his face into the body. His glasses, too. In his dream, he rolled a white paper hospital gown, stuffed it into the incision, and sewed the patient up. His wife was leaving him. He'd had too much to drink. Are you all right? The nurses asked, shaking their heads. Are you sure? We bury the body or we leave it on a ledge to the darkness. We tie rocks around its legs and sink it in the sea. We put it in a bag and throw it from a cliff. We remove the indifferent entrails. We remove the brain piece by piece through the nose. We sew the eyelids shut. We sprinkle it with ochre. We stuff it with fruit. We stuff it with gold. We sew inside it wine and aromatic spices, a beloved family pet. So do we make of the emptiness of the body a vessel for the meanings we impose upon it, the professor told her students who wrote all of this down. What would it mean to spend my last moments knowing that inside me the surgeon's wedding ring had clotted over, grown thick and blood encapsulated? His wife, anyway, had left him. His children disliked him. He'd been up all night drinking and left the shot glass in the body of a patient. And when I opened my eyes, his face floated between mine and the surgical lamps like God's holy visage. And so I hovered high above the heads of the nurses, above the breathing machine and its many cords, over the poles and the dangling bags of fluids. Death must be distinguished from dying, with which it is often confounded, the professor said, holding up a book. While into my body the surgeon poured his drinks and tears. Into my body he stuffed his money. Into my body he lost his children and his wife. Into my body his distant youth vanished. When it goes, it takes our fears with it and creates new ones, the professor told her students, gesturing to the surgeon who was washing his hands and crying. And after a while, the professor closed her book, and went home to her life. The surgeon, too, returned to his quiet house and his fears. My body, empty of me, lay on the table like an overstuffed bag.